Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Tuesday, April 21st, 2026. I'm John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary Magazine. With me, as always, executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Senior editor Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
And social commentary columnist Christine Rosen. Hi, Christine.
Hi, John.
So we're gonna forbear on Iran and the talks and everything today because no one knows what's going on except that apparently Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut actually wants Iran to win the war, run our blockade, kill Americans, and succeed, which I think the voters of Connecticut ought to know about, but we can put that to one side and talk about some other extraordinarily disturbing things that are going on in the realm of the treatment of Jews, Jewish politicians, Jewish voters, Jewish educators, Jewish students, and Jewish synagogue goers, both here and abroad. Seth, I was hoping you could walk us through some of the lowlights of the past week.
Sure. I think probably makes a lot of sense to start in London because there were 3 incidents in the past week. The Sunday was the latest one, where there was an arson attack on Kenton United Synagogue, and it was basically it was some sort of intended to be some sort of homemade firebomb or bottle rocket. It seems, and before that, and then for the prior week there were 2. There were bottle rockets thrown at Finchley Reform Synagogue, which is also in London, and a fire was set at a Jewish nonprofit. And this comes after, in April, so in March, was the Hatzalah ambulances, the emergency ambulances, were set on fire. And all in all, there is a lot of evidence, according to the Metropolitan Police, that Iran is involved in this, essentially paying off teenagers or early 20s people to just go around setting Jewish things on fire.
There's another thing that we should mention, which is that there was a supposed drone plot broken up. That drones were going to be used to attack the Israeli embassy in London, and an Islamist group called Harakat al-Hashab al-Yamin al-Islamiyah claimed responsibility for this plot that apparently got broken up, and I believe people have been arrested. I'm looking at this.
And there was also some sort of
7 people have been arrested in this plot.
And some sort of chemical liquid was also left outside the Israeli embassy, right. I think in London too. Yeah. So this is this group, and by the way, that the meaning of the name is the Yamin part is the right hand. So next time you see the red right hand pins on all the actors at the Oscar ceremonies and on the red carpet. But this seems like an Iranian subgroup, this right hand group, but it just seems to be a chaos-driven thing, which is part of what has Jews in London and elsewhere so concerned. It's not as though the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps are storming synagogues. They're paying, hoodlums and whatever to just set random Jewish things on fire, to throw bottle rockets at stuff. And it's creating a sense of disorder, of public disorder in London that is unusual even for spates of antisemitism and anti-Semitic vandalism. So it's a new and unusual thing, and it's becoming increasingly common. I mean, again, we did name 3 things within the past week. We named 4 things within the past week, I guess, because the Israeli embassy also was within a week, right? So we're talking about, and 2 separate things, supposedly we're focused on the Israeli embassy. Does that make 5 in a week? I mean, these numbers are highly unusual for virtually anywhere. And there's other stuff going on. And in the States, the most recent thing in the States was there's this fairly well-to-do town in Westchester County called Scarsdale, and their public school, they have an Israel club, and the Israel Cultural Club have made a flyer for an event, and the flyers were put around school, and then they were found ripped off the walls and thrown in the urinals in the boys' bathrooms. And the daughter of a school board member um, posted this approvingly on, I think it was Instagram, saying "keep up the good work" or something like that. And so the school board member now finds himself, apologizing for himself and the kid and whatever. But this is another thing that's we've sort of watched this happen in New York's more exclusive progressive schools for years, right? We've seen this sort of when we've seen in some cases we've seen the schools divide up kids by race and make the Jews be white, and all this other stuff. But there's all the ones that seem to be driven by a progressive ideology in recent years have found all sorts of ways to spread this stuff. It's clearly spreading to the students. Started with teachers, teaching them that Zionists are bad and Zionism is evil and, Israel and whatever. And it's clearly being picked up by the students now. So that was in New York.
It's particularly a pungent fact that it's Scarsdale because so the Scarsdale High School, the legendary high school in the 1950s and 1960s. It was considered the best public high school in the United States. People moved to Scarsdale to send their kids through the Scarsdale public school system because it was viewed as the great public feeder to the Ivies, and it was Jews who moved out of New York City to Scarsdale to send their kids to Scarsdale High School that not only were taking advantage of it, but who produced the stats, the numbers that made Scarsdale High School appear to be this unbelievably successful public school. It's 60 years ago. It's a lot, to me feels like a heartbeat, but whatever. It's a long time ago and the world is very different. And I don't think that Scarsdale High School has the same valence that it once did, or that Scarsdale has the definition of being the sort of like the exclusive suburb of America, the place where you've made it if you live in Scarsdale. But it is very pointed that that's happening there for these historical reasons. And then, of course, we now need to move on to the big issue, which was the convening of the Democratic Party convention in Michigan.
Right. So the way that the regents of the University of Michigan, the state university, are chosen is through a basic political process. And in contrast to the way many schools choose their regent, just so people know. So the election for University of Michigan regent is a very political. It's a political election, and so at the party conferences, the party themselves, the Democrats and the Republicans, nominate someone to run for the open seat of the University of Michigan Board of Regents. And then that's the nominating process. Delegates vote there and pick the nominee, and then there's a general election. So it's basically like you're running for office. And the Democrats had a sitting regent. These are 8-year terms, and his name was Jordan Acker, and he was again a Democrat, but presume pro-Israel, but even that is sort of making it too political. He just was against BDS, boycott and divestment.
He was a Jewish member of the Board of Regents of the University of Michigan who was not an anti-Zionist, not a big force in the pro-Israel, pro-Zionist community, just simply a Jewish regent. And before and last year, his home was targeted by
in 2024.
Okay, so 2 years ago his home was he was doxxed, his address was published, his home was targeted, it was egged, it was attacked by encampment people in and around Ann Arbor, I guess. Anyway,
Yeah.
so there's
They showed up at his house. They showed people actually showed up at his house a couple of times. At first, they showed up at his house one morning with a list of demands, and when, of course, those demands weren't met, they showed up again at his home, and they painted the Hamas upside down red triangle, which is a target, on his wife's car. And they also smashed up windows and stuff like that. People were home, so
that preceded what then happened this weekend at the convention of the Democratic Party in the state of Michigan, which
so again, this
was choosing out right.
Right. This is all of this is, as if choosing a nominee for a member of Congress. That's the way to understand it. It's all political. This is not a school thing in the classic sense.
Right.
And the Democrats chose, they chose to not renominate Jordan Acker, and instead they chose Amir Makled to be the nominee. So there's some background here that's kind of important. The first thing to know is that Makled is pro Hezbollah. He has, he mourned the death of Hassan Nasrallah. The Free Beacon has some very good reporting on this, by the way, on the things that he has said on social media and have since been deleted. But so that's where you can, sort of find a roundup of this. But he encouraged Iran to show no mercy against Israel, things like that. I mean, just your typical sort of anti-Zionist. And he was,
to be fair, not just a typical actual supporter of Hezbollah, an Iranian front group, and a supporter essentially of Iran's efforts to destroy Israel. Like, so not just like, well, there shouldn't be a Jewish state, or, there should be a binational state. Like, he is a supporter of terrorist acts against Jews who live in Israel and probably in the United. I mean, I'm sure he was involved in some fashion in what happened with Jordan Acker. Anyway, please go on.
So he also, by the way, he regularly retweets the crazy anti-Semitic conspiracy theories of Candace Owens. So he's a big Candace Owens supporter as well.
Yes,
and he's an ally of Abdullah al-Sayed, who's running for Senate, who is also an extreme anti-Israel, anti-Zionist, anti-Semite candidate. Makled has campaigned with al-Sayed, and he has campaigned with him at campaign stops where Hassan Piker has also joined them in that campaign stop. So the three of them are sort of a trio. Hassan Piker is an anti-Semitic and an anti-American podcaster, influencer,
Twitch gamer.
On the left, rather than on most of
the school board. So that's the school board.
But I do want to say.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, so I do want to say one more thing about Makled, because I don't think a lot of people know this, and I don't want to take up all the time, but I think this is important. I wrote something last year on this. Dana Nessel is the Attorney General, she is the Attorney General of the state of Michigan. She's Jewish. She filed charges against an encampment at Michigan, and the encampment was they brought in generators and other makeshift electrical stuff. Okay, and the school brought in the fire marshal and said, what is this dangerous, whatever. The fire marshal said, and here I'm quoting, if a fire were to occur within this encampment, the human casualty rate would be catastrophic, because the densely placed tents with no egress pathways and the highly combustible nature of the tent materials and other furnishings have made it highly susceptible to fire. So they brought in, essentially fire starters, and they had a bunch of flammable material, and there was no room to move. And the fire marshal said, you got to clear this out. This is a death trap. And they refused to. So they brought in the police, and the police came in to clear it out because it was illegal and a death trap. And several people threw furniture at the cops. They resisted arrest. Immediately afterwards, initially, in addition to lower charges, there were 7 felonies that Dana Nessel brought, 7 felony charges against people in the encampment who resisted arrest. and the rest got like trespassing. When that happened, Rashida Tlaib accused, this was an infamous comment. It was a scandal for a couple of days. Rashida Tlaib went on TV and accused Dana Nessel essentially of being biased because she's a Jew, saying that Dana doesn't do this stuff to people who protest for the environment or climate stuff, but when it comes to Palestinians, and we all know why, and that sort of thing. Dana Nessel went on TV and said, you don't have to be, she said something like, you don't have to be Agatha Christie to decode what Rashida Tlaib is saying. Gretchen Whitmer, the governor, and she said, well, I don't really want to get involved. And it became a whole thing where Nessel was being targeted for bias, meaning they wanted to have her removed from the case. She's attorney general. Because she was Jewish, they couldn't articulate any other reason besides a Jewish attorney general really shouldn't be prosecuting these kids. And
by the way, just to add to this, Dana Nessel is a progressive. Dana Nessel is an unabashed democratic leftist. She arose as a gay activist. I mean, that was her sort of introduction to politics, and is in no way, shape, or form any kind of neocon or Fetterman or Lieberman Democrat. She is a left-wing Democrat of very, very good standing, except for this. Okay.
Yes. And who was the attorney representing several of these kids who were charged? Amir Makled, who was just named by the Democrats as their pick to replace Jordan Acker as for that seat for the University of Michigan Board of Regents. And Amir Makled, when he was representing these, he represented, by the way, not just some of the trespassers, he represented some of those who were charged initially with felonies for resisting arrest. And he said, this was a case of selective prosecution and rooted in bias, not in public safety issues. So just to bring it full circle, the Michigan Democratic Party convened their convention and chose not to renominate Jordan Acker, who is Jewish and whose home has been vandalized and invaded, and who has been the subject of an anti-Semitic campaign for the Democratic nomination for the Board of Regents, and instead chose Amir Makled, the attorney for the Tentifada activists, some of whom were the type that were vandalizing Jordan Acker's home, threatening his wife, etc. Amir Makled himself accused Dana Nessel, Jewish state attorney general, of bringing those charges because she was biased essentially because of her Judaism. So that the full picture, just to understand who Amir Makled is, Hezbollah supporter, ally of Abdul al-Sayed, and appeared with Hassan Piker, and was a central player in this campaign to get a Jewish attorney general removed from the case. In the end, Dana Nessel dropped the charges, in part, she said, because of the media circus that it all became. The judge was slow walking it, but essentially what was happening is they were hanging her out to dry. So people understand that the judge was slow walking it so that the attacks on her supposed bias would dominate the public conversation around this trial and make it impossible to have a serious trial or case go forward.
Okay.
Can I add one other sort of widening of the aperture here? Because I think this is a really crucial point, because a lot of people would say, why do we care about someone being, appointed to a board of regents at a university? Who cares? But the reason this is important, I'm really glad Seth connected that final dot, is that these are the people whom students who are the target of harassment and anti-Semitic violence and all of the things that we've been talking about for years that go on college campuses, that's who they can appeal to for help. And this isn't just a U.S. problem. Because we focus a lot on what's been happening with anti-Semitism on campus, a friend in the U.K. sent me recently a report about what's going on there to Seth's earlier comments about anti-Semitism in the U.K. And half of the students that were surveyed in UK, this was a Union of Jewish Students survey poll of thousands of students, half of the students said that they had heard slogans or chants glorifying Hamas, Hezbollah, or other terrorist groups. 65% had had their learning disrupted by some sort of protest. But here's the fact that really concerns me long term, and we've seen similar polling on U.S. campuses. 1 in 5 students reported that they would be reluctant to or would never house share with a Jewish student, because they were polling all students. That kind of social ostracism. I was just going to say that kind of social ostracism is really corrosive in terms of long-term anti-Semitism taking root in institutions. This idea that it's fine to shun them. In fact, some of these UK students posted advertisements looking for housemates saying, anyone welcome except Zios. This sort of thing is also taking root on US college campuses. And it's when you have people appointed to oversee these university campuses who shrug at that, who would never shrug if these were directed at someone of any other race, ethnicity, or creed. That is what we're talking about here. That is why it's so important that even this singular episode in Michigan, it will be replicated across other states as it has been in the UK.
A child of a close friend of mine, my family, who attends a prominent college in upstate New York and is on her junior year abroad, got a letter from her roommates or an email from her roommates announcing that they would not live with her in the next year because she is a Zionist. And this raised interesting problems because, of course, you can't just sit there and take it. And on the other hand, you would say, well, obviously, you don't want to live with those people anyway. So why would you even complain? Or what's the complaint? Or if you win, if you go to the administration and you argue and you say, she's been targeted in this way by the people that she is supposed to be living with next year, the administration then intercedes and forces them to allow her to live with them, then she's got to live with them. So the incredibly clever attack on individuals by raising the stakes and the temperature, by making it clear that if you hold views or even talk about views, and I'm not even talking about a campus activist here, the young woman I'm talking about is not an activist. It's not just about them. It is about the fact that the story will spread, and the story will spread to freshmen, and the word will come down to freshmen who are Jews on campus that they need to keep their mouths shut, and they need to take their Magen Davids and put them and hide them under their shirts, and they need not to go to defend, not to write anything in the school newspaper or say anything in class. Another case of another prominent liberal arts school, friend of mine, daughter, freshman at a prominent liberal arts school in Connecticut, has come under assault for saying something in a classroom about a syllabus that seemed to be unbalanced, where Marx's On the Jewish Question was being read, but where other warning labels that have been placed on other controversial works being read in this class about how they might be triggering on race and matters like that was not expressed about this signature anti-Semitic work by Marx, maybe one of the most important anti-Semitic documents ever published. And this has now led her to be criticized on campus by people talking trash about her and all of that. And so it's not just about her, and it's not just about the other girl that I'm talking about. It is about everybody else, and the message that is being transmitted to young Jews all over America that their lives at university are going to be hell if they don't keep their mouths shut. That's what's going on here. That's what the Jordan Acker thing is about also, because Jordan Acker was against BDS. So you target him, you paint a Hamas target on his house, and then you target him at the, politically at the Michigan Democratic Convention. Now we should also then talk about the Michigan Senate race, because you mentioned Abdul El-Sayed, the Democratic candidate. So 6 months ago, there are three leading candidates in the race. Haley Stevens,
for the Democratic nomination.
So it's Haley Stevens, Mallory McMorrow, whom people will remember from the Democratic Convention in 2024, being one of the people who read the Project 2025 book like it was a giant storybook. If anybody remembers watching this, where they would read passages from the Heritage Foundation's Project 2025 out of this giant book, as though, to show how evil the Trump administration's agenda would be. And she's very pretty. And so that was a sort of like real enunciation of Mallory McMorrow's political future. So there's Mallory McMorrow, there's Haley Stevens, and there is Abdul El-Sayed. So as the year has progressed, Haley Stevens, who was apparently in the lead early on, seems to have fallen back. And so in the polling, I guess the primary is in June, the polling shows Abdul El-Sayed and Mallory McMorrow tied around 25% of the vote each. And Abdul El-Sayed would be the most radical person ever elected to the U.S. Congress, including the squad. Abdul El-Sayed is a doctor in Detroit or something. Anyway, he is pretty much an open supporter of terrorist groups, of anti-American groups, anyway. So, and the convention was essentially taken over by people who want him to be the nominee. So when Haley Stevens spoke, she was shouted down. She is a Democrat in good standing. This isn't like, people infiltrated from the Republican Party to make a scene. She was shouted down. And why was Haley Stevens shouted down?
And she's an elected. She's a congresswoman.
She's a congresswoman.
So we should know, like, Democrats have nominated her to be a congresswoman. She's an elected
What else
Democrat.
is the case about Haley Stevens?
She is pro-Israel.
Yeah, she is, relatively speing, pro-Israel, right? Relatively speaking, like, by me, I wouldn't be giving her all sorts of points on being pro-Israel, but you take what you can get, I guess.
Right. It's all relative.
Yeah. So, that is her. So she was shouted down. She was not allowed to give a speech at the Democratic Party convention. She is a Democratic member of Congress from the state of Michigan, and the scene on the floor looked like, what did it look like? It looked like chaos. It looked like a riot, basically. And so this is happening. Michigan, of course, central swing state in the United States, like went right, Trump, Biden, Trump. There's a gubernatorial race this year. There is a Senate race this year. Democratic hopes of winning the Senate, which is a long shot, but absolutely rely on Democrats being able to win the seat retain the seat in Michigan, which is held by the retiring Gary Peters. If they lose the seat, there is literally no way that the math can work for them to win, or it's like it drops to a 5% chance. And right now, if you had to bet, you would bet that Abdul El-Sayed is going to win the nomination. He's risen from 12% to 24%. that's how that's you know that's it's like the Mamdani track. You start out low, you grow, everything starts to center on you. Your supporters are like rabid and serious, and the other supporters are just sort of middle of the road conventional Democrats who don't have the same passion.
I I think Mamdani is the relevant person here because it's like the Mamdani track, except it's easier now because he cleared the path. This is why, I think people largely underestimated the importance of Mamdani's election. Has nothing to do with how he governs New York City, in my opinion. That's not the most relevant aspect of his becoming mayor. It's more like the first successful test of the atom bomb or something. And now we're seeing the replications all over. And we're seeing the more establishment type, but left cavers to the left, moving closer, providing more and more cover to the radical anti-Zionists and Jew haters, running on and promoting every day. I don't take money from AIPAC. The future of this party is no support for aid to Israel, and so on. And of course, we've discussed this before, but the media aspect of this, the embracing of the Hassan Pikers and all the other Jew haters. This is something that Mamdani, his victory, has set in motion, has enabled. Before that, you remember what happened to the sort of wishy-washy leftists at the university administration level. They were humiliated and dealt with, but then the hardcore out of the Tentifada movement, they rose up and said, no, we're going to be uncompromising and win. And now we're looking at a whole different ballgame. And by the way, John, you bring up the squad. The squad would be as overtly radical as El Sayed today. I mean, I'm sure they are today. It wasn't safe politically for them to be that way back in those the halcyon days of 15 years ago.
When they spoke in code, when they
Right.
said said Jews like
Yes.
Benjamin. I know, but that was code,
Right.
And now you would just say Jews are murderers and
Right.
Well,
Jews are
this
killers.
is an important point because it's also forced the hand of Jewish Democrats, particularly in states like Michigan, who are now coming out, including elected Jewish Democratic officials who say, suddenly I'm politically homeless because my party is enthusiastically supporting Hamas supporters or Hezbollah supporters. But that's a question. They don't necessarily feel like there's a place for them to go in the Republican Party right now either. And that political homelessness is only going to grow for Jewish Democrats. And we've seen glimmers of it here and there where we've questioned, if you care about Israel right now, you would generally want to support the GOP because it has a much better record of supporting the state of Israel. However, the right-wing anti-Semitism problem remains a serious issue, and that's something that I think will prevent some Democrats from migrating to the GOP. But that, I think, particularly in, Michigan still is kind of a purple state. Watching particularly in the midterms and in the next presidential election, where those voters go will tell you a lot about the future, not just of the Democratic Party, which is going in the wrong direction, but of where the GOP is going to align in its next generation of leadership with regard to these questions. Echelon Insight's recent poll, I think, gives a little more optimistic news about GOP support for Israel than the previous poll we were talking about the other day. It's a little more optimistic.
Yeah, and he's in that. You talk about pulling along Jewish Democrats. Haley Stevens, in order to win her current seat, the Democratic nomination, she had to. So there was a redistricting that put a congressional Democrat named Andy Levin in the district that Haley Stevens, would be running for. So they had to run against each other because of redistricting. The non-Jewish, somewhat pro-Israel representative beat the Jewish anti-Israel. Andy Levin's loss was a win for the Jews of America,
Right.
as weird as that sounds. So that was sort of an early, that was that 2022? I think it was 2022, 4 years ago. Right?
Yeah.
So that was an early, that was right before October 7th and all that. So that was an early trend. The other thing to mention is the way, and you both mentioned this, the way it's pulling Democrats in general, right? The third as John mentioned, the third candidate in the Democratic Senate race for the Democratic nomination, Mallory McMorrow, she believes that Israel committed genocide in Gaza, and she just put out a video where she stridently denies ever taking money from AIPAC and promises that she never will. So if Haley Stevens fades in this, because right now she's in third place, the moderate alternative to El Sayed is someone who accuses Israel of committing genocide in Gaza and joins the "I'll never take money from AIPAC" campaign. That's the moderate version. She just doesn't openly praise Hezbollah. And we're going to see this story play out. If McMorrow, by the way, is a pretty talented politician, and so she's certainly, as we said, they're neck and neck. The momentum is with El Sayed, but McMorrow is, a kind of a grassroots darling also. So she will stay competitive, surely. If she wins the nomination, the narrative we're going to hear from Democrats is, oh, see, we headed off the extremist anti-Semite and, picked the moderate. And just remember now, as per the earlier part of our conversation where we talked about how everything is relative, that is the moderate alternative, is accusing Israel of genocide and joining the anti-AIPAC campaign. And they do that because Haley Stevens is someone who isn't embarrassed to, be supported by pro-Israel PACs and Jewish donors, whatever.
In terms of other signs of the change in the temperature in the atmosphere, aside from, we haven't even talked about Graham Plattner, the Maine Democratic Senate candidate, who is also a believer in the genocide theory of Israel's treatment of the Palestinians in Gaza, who now live in greater numbers than they did before the war started in 2023. So the world's most unsuccessful genocide leads to an increase in the population of the people who were being genocided. That's really quite an accomplishment. But Graham Plattner, of course, with the Nazi tattoo and all kinds of stuff, is clearly on a glide path to winning that nomination against the governor, Janet Mills, who was sort of like seduced into running for the seat on the grounds that she was the only person who could stop the sitting incumbent Republican liberal senator, Susan Collins, who is, always under threat of losing, and then proves to be unexpectedly strong on election day and beats the people who were supposedly going to beat her rather comfortably, which I expect would be the case with Graham Plattner as well. That's why Mills was chosen, because she is a proven vote getter who got votes statewide in greater numbers than Susan Collins did, and therefore should be able to outlast her. But the Democratic Party has moved away from the passionate primary voter in the Democratic Party is now much more akin to the Republican voters of 2009 and 2010, who unseated incumbents, who gripped onto conservative ideology, and formed the Tea Party, went through the whole process, and then found themselves in power, at least in the House, with a gigantic victory over Obama because of the conditions of that had attained with the passage of Obamacare and other things. but that was about healthcare and about liberals and liberalism, and so much of the passion here is about this one issue, this country of 9 million people that is smaller than Rhode Island, that is sitting there engaged in a battle for its existence. And what is so terrible about it? It is made up of, it's a Jewish state. And that is from California to Maine, Michigan, districts in New York City. Zoran Mamdani getting elected mayor. There is a race for the congressional seat held by Dan Goldman versus Brad Lander, two Jewish candidates. Brad Lander, an anti-Zionist. Dan Goldman, again, not my idea of a Zion, not my idea of like a great supporter of Israel, but again, you get what you know.
He's no Herzl.
He's no Emmanuel Seller. He's no nothing. But, he only got in because he's got $500 million from his Levi Strauss family, and he went on MSNBC to attack Trump. That's how he got himself elected in that district. And now he is being attacked from the left for being a Zionist by Brad Lander, a really repulsive New York City politician who is openly anti-Zionist. And
an ally of Mamdani, to bring it back to the Mamdani stuff. He
they ran
takes credit for...
Yeah, they ran. They said go 1-2 in a what do you call it? Ranked choice electoral model.
This
ran
brings
together.
up something else. Excuse me, because you have these supposed moderate Democrats now going out, making TV appearances and saying, "Look, if the Democrats want to win, they got to get rid of this radical stuff. This radical stuff may work in a small election in a liberal, or an election in a liberal city, but if you want a national victory, if you want a national party, you got to drop this radicalism." Oh, the anti-Israel stuff? That's not radical. We're keeping that.
Yeah.
Well, that's so important, because I think Plattner is a perfect example of this. Elizabeth Warren and Plattner drew a huge crowd in Portland, Maine over the weekend, and Elizabeth Warren called him her kind of man, and she, the devil's bargain she is making with anti-Zionism, with its, in Plattner's case, very strong currents of anti-Semitism attached, is that to win, we've got to build our coalition out and include people in it who otherwise would have, a generation ago been completely unpalatable to Democrats. And I think we'll see more and more of that from the economic populist wing of the Democratic Party, because they don't have enough support to get their agenda across without recruiting these folks. And that's worrisome, or should be if you're a Democrat, which I'm not. So I'm kind of like watching this. We're all watching this from some distance. But the country needs a healthy center. And that is, I think, to go back to, a frequent rant of mine, our primary process doesn't reward moderate centrist candidates. It rewards the fringes on either side. And we're seeing this play out. But what it's doing is not, disgusted centrists just won't show up at the polls and vote. It's actually drawing the center of a lot of these parties further and further to the fringe, even in the general election, in terms of the candidates we're seeing.
I don't know,
and they're doing there's something else that bothers me that concerns me about the way Democrats talk about people like Graham Plattner, which is, we all know that the anti-Zionism, right, as Abe said, the anti-Zionism is what was, why Zoran Mamdani is where he is. It's, it's not about grocery stores. But what the liberal and what used to be known as the center-left sort of commentariat says about Graham Plattner is that it's okay he goes on the podcasts of people who, express fairly Nazi-ish type opinions about Jews. It's okay that he goes on, that he go, not just Hassan Piker, but there's a whole stable of this. It's not just on the right, although it, obviously the right, has a much bigger market share of that sort of podcastistan, just as they, became an alternative on radio. But he has gone on, these guys' shows, and Democrats say it's okay. In fact, it's good, because you have to talk to regular people. You have to talk to normal people. And Democrats, they say, don't know how to address white men, normal men. They only know how to, they have all these cultural issues, but there is so much hostility to normal men. They have to get normal men out there. And what bothers me about this, aside from moving the Overton window of just what is a normal man in America, thank you very much, but
Not one with a Nazi tattoo, I'll tell you.
right, but there's the
no,
idea that if you want to appeal to normal Americans, you nominate the guy with the Nazi tattoo. This is part of the pulling, out of the, as Abe said, oh, that's not the anti-Zionism, that's not radicalism. They just don't like genocide. But what they're actually doing is saying, like, if you want to be normal in America, it's normal to have a Nazi tattoo. It's not normal to, support Israel or, support Israel's existence or whatever.
Partially what they're saying is that they are buying into this bizarre caricature. There, as Abe says, we need to reach, or Seth says, we need to reach normal men, white men. We got to reach white men. So, of course, all white men are Nazis. So, of course, Graham Plattner is fine, because we're all Nazis. So, that's really, really appealing to us. And, that's who's listening to Nick Fuentes or, watching Sneeko or whoever, or, they're Nazis, and whites are Nazis, and we're all white supremacists. So if Graham Plattner can look like a white supremacist while being a progressive radical, that's really great. That's what a fantastic new form of coalition building.
You're right. They're actually leading. You're right. Remember just many years ago, not that many years ago, when we were all saying, no, we're not all white supremacists just because of skin, post George Floyd. And now they're actually leaning into the white supremacy argument with their candidates.
Right. Well, so I think what's crucial also is something is going on the right that is worth highlighting, because Christine points out, and look, we've been talking about this incessantly, publishing about it. I've written about it. Seth's written about it. There's a lot of Abe's writes about this. Our fear about the podcast sphere and all of that, and the right's open flirtation or grasp or embrace of not only anti-Zionism but anti-Semitism. Something has been happening over the last month. And it's not only Trump leaning in, as he has twice this weekend, to the idea that Israel is our greatest ally and that we're partners and Israel's great and Bibi's and everything's great, which he has again he has tweeted throughout this war. It is Tucker Carlson this morning saying that he regrets, he is tormented by the fact that he helped Donald Trump get elected. Largely, I assume, because of the demonic monstrosity that is Israelism, that is controlling America in, rhetoric that goes beyond Father Coughlin and beyond Lindbergh and beyond, George Lincoln Rockwell, practically. Israelism, right? So Tucker is now off the Trump train after his son left J.D. Vance's office and his connection is now clearly severed. He is now anti-Trump. Who else is anti-Trump? Nick Fuentes says vote for Democrats. Who else is anti-Trump? Marjorie Taylor Greene resigns from Congress, is now an activist against Trump. What is her issue? Jewish space lasers. Who else is anti-Trump? Thomas Massie, most anti-Israel member of the Republican Party. Trump actively attempting to get his rival in the primary elected and knock Massie out of office. The podcast sphere, Candace Owens also talking about this, the right-wing podcast sphere that was leaning into anti-Semitism, that had us all terrified that they were going to take over the Republican Party, appears to be abandoning the Republican Party. They are not. It's not like what they're trying to do here is say we're gonna Tea Party out all of the bad guys. They're quitting. They're leaving Congress. They're leaving office, or they're going to get voted out of office. This is a heartening development that we should take note of, whether you're a Republican or not, but you are fearful of the rise of anti-Semitism in the United States. Something is happening there that deserves to be noticed, to be made of it, while all of this is happening in the Democratic Party, while Rahm Emanuel, mayor of Chicago, ambassador to Japan, White House chief of staff to Barack Obama, the person who helped get Democrats elected to the House time and again when he was head of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, Rahm Emanuel went on Bill Maher's show, Rahm Emanuel thinking of running for president in 2028. Preposterous idea. Why? The Democratic Party is going officially anti-Zionist and implicitly anti-Semitic, and he is a Jew with an Israeli father. Good luck to you, Rahm Emanuel. Aside from being the single most obnoxious person I have ever met in American politics, the most unpleasant, the most sneering, the most sort of like personally touchy and creepy in a lot of ways.
His father, by the way, his father was in the Irgun.
His father was in the Irgun. So by the that'll be so. Anyway, the idea that he has any chance, he's a very able political fundraiser and stuff like that. No Jew is getting elected in this party in 2028. It ain't going to be Rahm Emanuel. He won't deserve it. Because he doesn't deserve it. But what did he do? He went on Bill Maher's show and said, we should completely cut off aid to Israel. Because he's toying with this. He is toying with being a...
Well, he did. Can I clarify? He did something much. I mean, he did do that effectively, but he did it in a very sophisticated signaling way, which is either he didn't know this, in which case his ignorance should keep him out of running for president, or he did it knowingly, which is kind of worse. And he talked about the way that aid between our two countries, allies, works in a way that was completely false and misleading. And suggested that we're just throwing money at Israel, without any sort of understanding of the fact that then they buy weapons from us. This has been going on for a while. This is good for us. It's good for them. I mean, he structured it in the way, the language he used and the tone he used it, and the way he framed it in deliberately misleading ways to do just what you said, John, curry favor with the anti-Israel left.
Right. In other words, what
he's
saying,
exactly, by the way, the type I'm talking about, because he's also on there talking about how Democrats need to discard the radicalism.
Right. But look, the question of whether or not Israel can afford to take American aid anymore if it creates this condition under which Israel can get attacked for taking American aid that is largely a domestic price support for firms in the United States that Congress then basically isn't allowed to pay off directly, but pays off implicitly by it's Caterpillar and John Deere and I don't know, Raytheon or whoever, who make military equipment that Israel then buys with American dollars. So it's essentially, as I say, domestic price support. That's a serious argument. Benjamin Netanyahu has said that he believes that within 10 years Israel should no longer accept aid from the United States. There was been a huge argument about this for 30 years. Milton Friedman was the first person to say that Israel was making a mistake. First of all, he didn't believe in foreign aid. Second of all, he said Israel's making a mistake because it then limits its freedom of movement. It gives Americans veto power over Israeli action. Some of that is really true, but the general position of people who supported Israel was it was important for there to be a show of American support for Israel, particularly against domestic opponents of Israel, who then, when Friedman was doing this, were almost exclusively centered in the Republican Party, which was, until the mid-'80s, 50-50 pro and anti-Israel. Very Arabist, very anti-foreign aid, all of that. And then the evangelicals came in and became the dominating force in the Republican Party. And a lot of evangelicals have this dispensationalist view of Israel, accept the idea that the Jews are the chosen people, that Israel is God's will, all of that, as well as a general idea in the Republican Party that we should support other pro-Western countries against evil, bad forces. So the aid question was always, all things being equal, Americans seem to like Israel. There should be an affirmation of that support by Congress in these votes as a way of forestalling some of the stuff that is happening now. Now you could say it's not worth it, because then the debate centers on how Israel is doing. And, basically it's like taking the temperature, and suddenly there's a vote and 40 Democratic senators are voting against Israel aid, as opposed to 20 or 10, 5 or 6 years ago, in this symbolic vote that Bernie Sanders always sponsors. And then it's like, well, that's bad. Like, don't make it so clear that the Democratic Party is fading away. But there is no way to put lipstick on this pig. The Democratic Party is now it will be an anti-Zionist party by 2028. It has to be, not only because this "we need moderates" thing seems to exclude Zionism, or like a healthy support for a pro-Western country that fights alongside the United States against one of the most evil regimes on earth, but because it's where the passion of the base is. And there are going to be 12, 13, 14, 15 people who are going to be running for president, just like there were last time, in 2019. And that what trans issues were, and other issues like that, were in 2019, where you swore your fidelity to the most liberal or leftist part of your party by going with the most radical version of the issues that they were playing with, including, remember, like the certain tax policies and single payer healthcare and all of that. The debates are going to center on Israel. It's crazy.
Rahm Emanuel is a great example of that, by the way, because he last made news by saying that a man can't become a woman, and that was treated as he's testing the waters, dipping his toe in the waters, and seeing, will he get eaten alive for crossing trans orthodoxy? And the answer is maybe that the trans orthodoxy is now anti-Zionist orthodoxy.
Exactly. But there will be an orthodoxy, and the orthodoxy, from what we can tell, I don't think this is like paranoia here. Israel is the dominating subject of the domestic conversation of the Democratic Party in the United States, as far as I can tell. Tell me what else they're talking about. What else are they talking about? Okay, well then Trump, okay, yeah. Trump an issue? Also, Trump's going to be gone. But, I mean, they're not even talking about Trump's threat to democracy. Maybe they're talking about the ballroom. I don't know. But they're not what they talk about is Israel. State after state, conversation after conversation with elected politicians. Why is the Maine Senate race turning on whether or not Graham Plattner's Nazi tattoo and hatred of Israel is, a good or a bad thing? This is Maine. There are 6 Jews in Maine. I was just reading a story about how there's a rural synagogue in Maine that is like desperately raising money to try to stay open because it doesn't even have enough families to make a minyan. Like, that's Maine. Why is this happening?
Well, there's also this. I mean, this is just future. We'll see as this plays out. But my theory is that the radical Islamist faction that seeks to take over both at the state, well, in New York's case, the city, the state, and the local elections, and Democratic Party infrastructure, they're playing a long game. And right now, both the vitriolic reaction to Bibi Netanyahu and Donald Trump plays in their favor. But when Netanyahu is gone and when Trump is gone, they will have laid the groundwork for a kind of anti-Zionism that they will, I think, hopefully nurture once those very polarizing figures have exited the public stage. And you see that in the way that these school boards and these, university regent positions are being held. That's where they teach the next generation what Israel is and what it should mean to us as an ally. And that's where I think, again, long term, they are playing a longer game here ideologically that's separate from a domestic political agenda, but they've become increasingly more savvy. And to Abe's earlier point, you're absolutely right. Mamdani was a blueprint for them in couching a lot of what their long-term strategy is in terms of domestic affordability issues or, education or healthcare. But the really radical ones, and there are a lot of them, have a longer game they're playing. So it won't matter if right now, yeah, they do hate Trump, they do hate Netanyahu, and they often use that as an excuse to say this is why we oppose Israel, because we don't like its leadership. Well, Netanyahu won't be there forever. What comes next?
And can I just say that the idea forming in democratic circles now is, well, we'll just, we'll join the stop foreign aid to Israel because we'll make the argument that Israel can afford it and it'll give Israel independence and we should blah, 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 right? We'll sell that. If they want to buy something, we'll sell them. They can buy it on their own, no aid, whatever. This concession, reasonable as it might sound, is not how it will be interpreted by the people demanding it. Rahm Emanuel can make an argument that Israel can afford it and it'll give it some independence and whatever. But he's doing it as a concession to people who believe that Israel is a genocidal, war criminal state and that it doesn't have the right to exist. Those are the people who are getting the victory for this. And if they think that, well, they'll quiet them down, they'll be satisfied with no aid to Israel. That's insane. What are you thinking?
Because it's not just aid to Israel. So let's say Israel no longer accepts American aid. The bill isn't written. Israelis say, don't give it to us. We don't want it. We don't need it. You don't want it. You don't want the trouble. That's when the boycotts start. So then we're not going to sell weaponry to Israel. They'll buy it. We're going to put up legislation to prevent them from purchasing it. Because you can't feed the vampire. You can't open the blood bank to the vampire and then expect the vampire to stop withdrawing from the blood bank. It will be constant and never ending. And then it will be, because the BDS movement is not just about, it's boycott, divestment, sanctions. So divestment is don't invest in companies that do business in Israel. That's never going to work any longer because Israel is too woven in because of its high-tech industry into major companies that nobody with any fiduciary responsibility can avoid taking positions in, from Google to Apple to all kinds of other places. But sanctions? Sure. Boycott? You betcha.
They don't effectively boycott, though, because if you're getting thousands of cancer treatments in this country come from drugs developed in Israel. So I do love the BDS crowd being like, we're not going to buy this kind of olive oil. And I'm like, really? Well, is your grandma getting chemotherapy? Yeah. Because you should stop her from getting that too. I mean, that's where the whole thing is just a drama.
Yeah, for years they were tweeting on their Motorola phones that they're going to boycott Sabra hummus.
Yeah. Anyway, what's key here is you can't feed the beast. You have to starve the beast. You can't give, not to play the the Atlantic Nazi Germany card, but if you're the Democratic Party and you empower, if your Democratic Party is Hindenburg, and then you start feeding the Nazis a little bit of power here and there. They're going to overthrow you, and then they're going to, burn the Reichstag and say that the Jews did it. So, beware where this is going, because people seem to think that threat to Jews is coming from, the anti-democratic tendencies of Trump's ideological hunger to remain in power. But right now, the threat to Jews in the United States comes almost exclusively from the left. Because remember, there are individual incidents of, right-wingers, doing mass acts of, like Tree of Life and other places. But the stuff that has been going on for the last 5 years that threatens Jewish identity, from my friends' kids on these liberal arts campuses to everything else we're talking about, is not coming from the right. And That argument is not going to hold water after this year if everybody gets elected who I think is going to get, or everyone. Now maybe they'll have a terrible year. Maybe things will go badly for them, and then the party will have water splashed in his face. But I don't think that's going to work because, the left took over the Democratic Party in the 1970s and lost. They won the House, lost the presidencies, and all of that, and they still marched on. So, the base is still the base.
And Republicans spent years losing seats with like the Sharon Angle types instead of the moderate or establishment type candidates, and then with Trump, and then the similar things happened. It didn't stop the nominating process on the right from rewarding people who were seen as frontline culture warriors and stuff like that. So it's not going to it's like watching this happen. We watch this movie, the sequel is no better than the original, but we know that it doesn't. We know that making a concession here and there doesn't work. We know that them losing only makes the base angrier and look to the establishment as if the establishment of their own party were the ones that sabotage them. If they would only retire and get out of the way, et cetera, et cetera. We know how this plays out.
Right. But I do want to end on this heartening note. Tucker Carlson is no longer a supporter, is now acknowledging that he is anti-MAGA, anti-Trump, and it's because of Israel. And Nick Fuentes doesn't like Trump, and Candace Owens doesn't like Trump, and none of them likes the Republicans. And Marjorie Taylor Greene quit Congress, and Matt Gaetz is a psychopath, and a phobiophilic psychopath. And Thomas Massie will likely lose his seat. And that's where the Republican Party is going. It is actually moving toward a kind of clarifying cleansing after this 6 months of barbarity. I hope. I mean, maybe I'm overly optimistic, but it feels that way a little bit. Anyway, we've kept you too long with this unbelievably depressing litany here. So
yet
please
totally
go.
On brand.
Yet totally on brand. So go have a better day than we're letting you have, please, and come back tomorrow and maybe we'll have better cheer to offer. So for Christine, Abe, and Seth, I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.